Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a massive, fascinating geopolitical shift today. For decades, we've all been conditioned to see China as this unstoppable economic engine, right? Just churning out staggering, record-breaking growth numbers year after year. But as recent data and expert analysis reveal, Beijing is quietly but drastically shifting gears. They are pivoting away from just chasing that pure economic explosion and moving straight towards strict domestic security, absolute control, and highly calculated global influence.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The central question from our source analysis boils down to this. Is the era of unbridled Chinese economic explosion officially behind us? Is Beijing truly betting on stability and control right now, rather than just breaking their own financial records? Let's find out.
To figure this out, we're going to follow a quick roadmap. First, we'll look at the economic slowdown, then the demographic time bomb, followed by Xi Jinping's tightening grip. After that, we'll explore their global South strategy, and finally, look at Taiwan, Hong Kong, and beyond.
All right, part 1, the economic miracle slows.
So, China's internal strategy, it really no longer prioritizes those massive double-digit growth numbers we all used to see. Instead, leadership is openly valuing stability and qualitative growth to protect against outside shocks. Think about it. In the past, we were used to seeing explosive growth, sometimes soaring to crazy highs like 15%. But that strategy has fundamentally shifted. The new 5-year plan for 2026 to 2030 actually targets a pretty modest 5% growth. Now, for a lot of Western economies, 5% would be a total home run. But for China, that is a conscious, massive deceleration. And the thing is, it's not just a planned slowdown. Some really massive, completely unexpected problems have entered the chat.
Our source material identifies 3 huge economic headwinds hitting them right now. First up, the collapse of the real estate giant Evergrande. This was a massive, inflated bubble. Basically, people took out mortgages for apartments in giant complexes that were never actually finished. So literally millions of ordinary citizens just lost their life savings overnight. Just vanished. On top of that, you have this really harsh economic hangover from the pandemic lockdowns that completely paralyzed their manufacturing. And the third, and honestly maybe the most critical factor, is a shrinking workforce that simply cannot fill the state coffers the way it used to.
Which brings us to part 2, the demographic time bomb.
Because the economy is pumping the brakes, the old social contract over there is starting to fracture. The deal used to be pretty simple. Work hard, don't complain, and your standard of living will just keep going up. Now, we're actually seeing young, highly educated engineers who can't find jobs in their fields ending up working as baristas. And this brilliantly illustrates a demographic time bomb that was literally decades in the making. Just look at the timeline. China enforced a strict one-child policy starting way back in 1979. It wasn't until between 2013 and 2021 that the state, kind of panicking over an aging population, relaxed the rules to allow 2 and then 3 children. Fast forward to today, and there are absolutely no limits at all.
In fact, the state is so desperate to boost the birth rate right now, they're even floating absurdly counterintuitive ideas, like, get this, higher taxes on contraceptives. But all these government incentives are just hitting a massive brick wall of reality. Raising a child in China today is incredibly expensive. Parents are expected to shell out for top-tier schools, premium healthcare, and pricey extracurriculars. Because of that, an entire generation of young adults is just opting out. They're opting out of parenthood altogether. For a state that desperately needs a massive influx of young workers to fund the care of a rapidly aging population, this is a huge strategic vulnerability.
Moving on to part 3, Xi Jinping's tightening grip. So to manage all these immense internal pressures and uncertainties, Xi Jinping has executed an unprecedented consolidation of power. He's systematically removed political opponents and built this powerful cult of personality. You can really see how this works in practice with the crackdown on Alibaba. We all know the tech giant, right? Well, its founder, Jack Ma, openly criticized state banking institutions at a conference in Shanghai. And what happened next? The billionaire celebrity completely disappeared from public life for a while, just gone. Once the dust finally settled, Alibaba was hit with an astronomical fine, and the state stepped right in to assert control over their algorithms. It sends a crystal clear message. The state controls the tech, and absolutely no corporation will ever be allowed to outgrow the party.
And this iron grip, it extends right into the military too. Xi Jinping has set a very firm goal to have a fully combat-ready military by 2027. The problem for them is the military has long been plagued by deep-rooted corruption. So according to analysts, we are now witnessing a sweeping, massive purge. high-ranking generals, and top officials. We're talking guys who were once incredibly close to the president, are abruptly disappearing without a trace.
But it's not just purges, there's also massive state support for modernization. The new 5-year plan includes a 7% bump in military spending, paired with gigantic investments into artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and robotics. And they are definitely making sure the rest of the world knows about it. I mean, during the New Year's celebrations, viral videos of Chinese robots performing kung fu martial arts absolutely flooded the internet. It's a wildly futuristic, maybe slightly ironic flex, but it sends a very deliberate message. We are a technological superpower. Just look at what we can do.
All right, let's look outward. Part 4, the Global South Strategy.
Because earlier influence efforts in Europe, like those scandal-ridden and ultimately failed CEFC investments in places like Czechia, kind of fell apart, Beijing is shifting its focus. The new target is the Global South. Xi Jinping introduced the Global Governance Initiative with a really clear objective. Basically, China's reaching out to nations in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia that might feel marginalized by the West or excluded from the US-led international order. Beijing is presenting itself as an alternative leader, a peacemaker, one that offers all this economic cooperation without demanding strict adherence to Western human rights standards in return.
So, the crucial point is how this actually plays out on the ground. China swoops in with funding and just starts building. They construct a beautiful, shiny high-speed railway in Laos, or these massive highways in Africa that lead straight to critical mineral mines they happen to need. They've even financed huge projects right in Europe, in countries like Montenegro. But as the analysts point out, there is a massive catch here. These poorer nations end up taking on enormous loans for these shiny new projects, and they fall into crushing debt traps. In several cases, like Laos and Montenegro, it has quite literally brought them to the very brink of national bankruptcy.
The analysis we're looking at also provides a really fascinating comparison between how China and Russia project their influence abroad. The Russian approach is largely described as pretty explicit, focused on short-term destruction. Think direct sabotage and blunt cyber attacks. China, on the other hand, they're playing the long game. Their influence is so much smarter and deeply integrated. They use economic leverage, they sponsor influencers on social media, they recruit Western scientists, and they systematically co-opt the political and business elites of their target countries. It's like a slow, methodical web, rather than a hammer.
And that brings us to our final section, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and beyond.
So how does this highly controlled, globally ambitious China behave in its immediate neighborhood or toward its geopolitical rivals? Well, to understand regional tensions, we briefly have to look at America. According to the source discussions, Beijing actually views the figure of Donald Trump as somewhat advantageous for them. While a Democratic administration typically focuses on human rights and building up strong alliances, Trump is viewed more as a pragmatic businessman. More importantly, analysts point out that his pressure on traditional U.S. allies like India and various European nations paradoxically alienates those countries, and that ends up pushing them to seek pragmatic agreements directly with Beijing.
Now, when it comes to territories that China considers its own, their approach is absolutely uncompromising. Take Hong Kong. A lot of people thought it would maintain its autonomy, but it is now under strict control. Protests have been entirely silenced, and traditional vigils, like lighting candles for the victims of Tiananmen Square, are now quickly shut down by police. And in regions like Tibet and Xinjiang, the source material notes that Beijing employs a long-term assimilation strategy. They are systematically relocating ethnic Han Chinese into these areas to deliberately dilute the local indigenous populations.
And then, of course, there's Taiwan. This is an open, democratic society that shares a history and, to some extent, a language with China, but its identity is completely distinct. The source material shares this incredibly striking quote to help Westerners really grasp the mentality over there. Calling a Taiwanese person Chinese is like calling a Czech person Russian. The vast majority of the population there identifies exclusively as Taiwanese, and for them, the constant pressure from mainland China is felt as an imminent existential threat to their entire way of life.
So, we've just looked at a country tackling massive demographic and economic hurdles by aggressively tightening the screws. Xi Jinping has completely removed his term limits, officially positioning himself to rule indefinitely. So I want to leave you with this provocative question that honestly the whole world is asking right now. What is his endgame? Will he emerge as a global peacemaker completely overshadowing the United States, or will he become an isolated, absolute ruler constantly fighting to extinguish internal crises? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and I can't wait to explore our next topic with you.